For 3 long years, Isolde faithfully planted a blue forget-me-not by the old stone well each morning. 1 flower for each day her beloved Edmund was away at war. 3 years of unwavering devotion, of counting the stars and whispering his name into the darkness, clinging to his promise that he would return to claim the blue ribbon he had given her. But when the triumphant procession finally marches into Redcroft village, Edmund Thorne doesn't rush to sweep her into his arms. Instead, his eyes, once filled with such tenderness, pass over her with the cold indifference of a stranger. At his side stands a noble beauty in scarlet, proudly introduced as his betrothed. "Forgive me, madam," he says with polite confusion. When Isolde calls his name, "But have we met before?" How could the man who carved their names into stone and swore eternal love forget her so completely? What dark forces conspired to erase her from his heart? Join us for an unforgettable medieval tale of enduring love and devastating betrayal, where memory becomes the final battlefield in a war that extends far beyond the northern borders. Will true love prevail against manipulation and deceit? Follow our channel for new chapters every week, like this video if your heart already aches for Isolde, and comment where you're watching from. This is one journey through medieval England you won't want to miss. The crisp autumn air carried the distant echoes of trumpets across Redcroft's cobblestone square. Golden leaves spiraled down from ancient oaks that had witnessed centuries of both war and peace in this small corner of medieval England. The royal banners fluttered in the breeze, their rich crimson and deep blue fabrics catching the afternoon. Sunlight as townsfolk gathered in excited clusters, their faces alight with anticipation. Among them stood Isolde Blackwood, a woman of 38, whose quiet beauty had only deepened with the passage of years and sorrow. Her chestnut hair, streaked with subtle strands of silver, was partially hidden beneath a simple linen headscarf. Unlike the chattering, festive crowd around her, Isolde remained silent, her emerald eyes fixed on the northern road where the returning soldiers would soon appear. In her trembling hands, she clutched a faded blue ribbon, its once vibrant color now dulled by countless nights of being held against tear-stained cheeks. 3 long years, 1,095 sunrises she had witnessed from the small window of her room at the Pine Hollow Inn, where she worked tending to travelers and, more devotedly, to the sprawling garden behind the establishment. 3 years of planting a single blue forget-me-not by the old stone well each morning, the very spot where Edmund had last held her, where his strong arms had encircled her waist as he whispered promises of return against her hair. "They're coming!" a child shouted, pointing toward the horizon, where dust clouds announced the approaching battalion. Isolde's heart thundered against her ribs. She pressed the ribbon to her lips, remembering Edmund's final words. "Keep this close to your heart, my love. When I return, I shall reclaim it with a kiss for every day I've been away." At 40, Edmund Thorne had been the most respected knight commander in Lord Harvington's service, a man whose battlefield wisdom was matched only by the depth of tenderness he showed Isolde behind closed doors. The crowd parted as drummers led the procession into the square. Isolde stood on tiptoes, straining to catch a glimpse of the familiar broad shoulders and auburn beard she had dreamed of night after night. Women rushed forward, embracing returning husbands and sons. Children squealed with delight as fathers lifted them high into the air. But Isolde remained rooted in place, suddenly gripped by an inexplicable fear. Then she saw him. Edmund rode atop a magnificent chestnut stallion, his armor gleaming in the autumn sun. The years had etched new lines into his handsome face, and a fresh scar ran along his left temple, yet he remained every bit the commanding presence she remembered. Isolde's breath caught in her throat. Just the sight of him made the long years of waiting collapse into nothing. But as she took her first step forward, her smile faltered. Beside Edmund's horse walked a young noblewoman in a dress of rich scarlet, velvet, her golden hair elaborately braided with pearls and rubies. The woman's delicate hand rested possessively on Edmund's stirrup, and the knight looked down at her with an expression that froze Isolde's blood, a look of unmistakable affection. "Edmund," she whispered, her voice lost among the cheering. A crowd. The procession halted as Lord Harvington emerged from the manor to formally welcome the returning soldiers. Speeches were made, honors bestowed, but Isolde heard nothing. She watched in growing desperation as Edmund dismounted and with practiced gallantry helped the scarlet-clad woman down from a palfrey that had been brought forward for her. Something was terribly wrong. This wasn't the homecoming she had envisioned. During those countless lonely nights, where was the running across the square? Where was the crushing embrace that would make the years of separation dissolve? Where was her Edmund? As the formal ceremonies concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Isolde gathered every ounce of courage within her and pushed forward through the throng. Her heart pounded so violently she feared it might burst from her chest. "Edmund!" she called, loud enough this time to be heard. He turned, his brow furrowed slightly as he searched for the voice. When his eyes fell upon her, Isolde's world stopped spinning. There was no flash of recognition, no warmth flooding his features. Only the polite curiosity one might show a complete stranger. "Edmund, it's me," she said, clutching the blue ribbon like a lifeline. "I've waited, every day, just as you asked." The scarlet-clad woman stepped closer to Edmund, her perfectly arched eyebrows drawing together in confusion. "My lord?" she questioned, her voice carrying the refined accent of nobility. Edmund studied Isolde's face for a long, agonizing moment before offering a courteous bow. "Forgive me, madam," he said, his voice the same deep timbre that had once whispered, "Devotion's against her skin, but have we met before?" The words struck Isolde like physical blows, each syllable another knife twisting in her heart. She staggered backward, unable to comprehend the complete absence of recognition in those familiar hazel eyes. You don't remember?" she managed, her voice breaking. "The Pine Hollow Inn, the garden, the well where you promised—" Edmund's expression shifted from polite confusion to uncomfortable pity. "I fear you must be mistaking me for someone else," he said gently. "This is Lady Bryony of Elwell, my betrothed." The scarlet-clad woman, Bryony, offered Isolde a smile that never reached her calculating eyes. "Perhaps you knew my lord before his injuries in the northern campaign? The physicians say some of his memories were lost." Lost. The word echoed through Isolde's mind like a death knell. How could 3 years of love, of passion and promises and shared dreams simply vanish? How could she be erased so completely? "We are to be wed within the fortnight," Bryony continued, seemingly unaware or perhaps cruelly aware of how each word drove Isolde further into despair. A union blessed by the king himself. The world began to spin around Isolde. The jubilant sounds of celebration transformed into a discordant cacophony that assaulted her senses. She looked down at the blue ribbon in her hands, the physical proof of what they had shared, and then back at Edmund's unrecognizing eyes. "You promised," she whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "You promised you would come back to me." Something flickered across Edmund's face then, the briefest shadow of something, confusion, pain, recognition. It was gone before Isolde could be certain it had been there at all. "I am sorry for your distress, madam," he said formally, "but I assure you, we have never met." The finality in his tone shattered whatever composure Isolde had maintained. The ribbon slipped from her fingers as her knees gave way beneath her. She collapsed onto the cold cobblestones, oblivious to the curious stares of passing villagers. Above her, Edmund hesitated, as though some instinct urged him to help this strange, distraught woman. but Lady Bryony gently pulled him away, murmuring something about the poor woman clearly being confused. As Edmund turned and walked away, a cheer rose from the crowd once more. The returning hero and his beautiful bride-to-be were the perfect embodiment of everything the people of Redcroft wanted to celebrate: victory, prosperity, a future untainted by the shadow of war. No one noticed the woman on her knees in the square, retrieving a fallen blue ribbon with trembling fingers. No one saw her press it against her lips once more, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. No one heard her whisper into the gathering dusk, "How could you forget?" Isolde remained there long after the square had emptied, after the celebrations had moved to the great hall of Lord Harvington's manor. The evening mist rolled in from the nearby river, enveloping her in its cold embrace as she knelt on the unyielding stone, clutching all that remained of a love that apparently had existed only in her heart. In the distance, music and laughter drifted from the manor windows. Torches blazed around the perimeter, throwing long shadows across the deserted square. Within those walls, Edmund was being celebrated, toasted, welcomed home as a hero, while the woman who had kept his memory, alive for 3 years, remained outside, invisible, forgotten. As darkness claimed the village completely, Isolde finally rose on unsteady legs. The blue ribbon now clutched against her heart, she took one last look at the manor where Edmund dined with his beautiful bride-to-be. Then, like a ghost, she turned and drifted back toward the Pine Hollow Inn, where a garden of 1,095 blue flowers awaited, silent witnesses to a love that, according to the man who had inspired it, had never existed at all. The celebration fires still burned bright across Redcroft long after midnight, their orange glow reflecting off the windows of the humble Pine Hollow Inn. But within the small attic chamber where Isolde had retreated, darkness reigned supreme. She sat motionless on the edge of her narrow bed, the faded blue ribbon wrapped tightly around her trembling fingers, staring at nothing and everything. How could he not remember? She whispered to the shadows, her voice hoarse from hours of silent weeping. 3 years of promises, gone like morning mist. Outside, drunken revelers sang boisterously about the brave knights who had defended the northern borders. Each chorus drove another splinter into Isolde's already shattered heart. She rose on unsteady legs and moved to the small window overlooking the village square, where just hours earlier her world had collapsed. The memory of Edmund's blank stare haunted her, those familiar hazel eyes, once filled with such tenderness, when they looked upon her, now regarding her with nothing but polite confusion. And beside him, that woman in scarlet, Lady Bryony of Elwell, with her golden hair and jewel-adorned braids, claiming Edmund as her betrothed. Isolde pressed her forehead against the cool glass, closing her eyes against a fresh wave of tears. Behind her closed lids, she saw Edmund as he had been 3 years ago, his auburn beard peppered with silver, laugh lines crinkling around his eyes as he held her close by the old stone well. "I will come back to you," he had whispered against her hair that final night. "No matter what awaits me on the battlefield, I will return to this spot, to these arms." She had believed him with every fiber of her being. Each day of those 3 long years, she had risen with the dawn to tend the garden behind the inn, planting a new forget-me-not by the well where they had shared their last embrace. The innkeeper, old Thomas, had thought her mad at first, but eventually came to respect her unwavering devotion. "You'll see," she had told Thomas just yesterday. "When he returns, we'll walk together among the flowers, and he'll know that I never stopped believing." But Edmund had returned, and he had not known her at all. A sharp knock at her door startled Isolde from her reverie. She hastily wiped her eyes with her sleeve before opening it to find Marta, the inn's cook, standing there, with a steaming mug of mulled wine. "Thought you might need this, dear," the older woman said kindly. "Word spread about what happened in the square." Isolde accepted the mug with a grateful nod, though the thought of food or drink turned her stomach. "Thank you, Marta." The cook lingered in the doorway, her weathered face creased with concern. "They're saying he took a terrible blow to the head in the Battle of North Crag Pass, that he woke not knowing his own name for nearly a fortnight." Isolde's fingers tightened around the warm mug. "Who told you this?" "Walter, the blacksmith's boy." "He served with Sir Edmund's company." Marta hesitated. "There's more talk too, about the lady in red." "Lady Bryony," Isolde whispered, the name bitter on her tongue. Marta nodded. "Daughter of the ambassador of Elwell. They say the king himself arranged the match as part of some treaty. Sir Edmund had no choice in the matter, wounded as he was. And with his mind—" She trailed off, perhaps realizing her words offered no comfort. After Marta departed, Isolde sat motionless, the mulled wine growing cold in her hands. A political arrangement, a treaty marriage. Was that why Edmund had forgotten her? Had he chosen to erase their love rather than face the impossibility of honoring his promises? No. The Edmund she knew would never have willingly forgotten her. If what Marta said was true, if he had been gravely wounded, perhaps his memory loss was genuine. Perhaps somewhere, buried beneath the fog of injury and duty, the man who had loved her still existed. She needed to know more. As dawn broke, over Redcroft, Isolde slipped from the inn wearing her plainest dress and a hooded cloak. The village was quiet now, most revelers still abed after the night's festivities. She made her way to the blacksmith's forge, where young Walter might be found. The boy was indeed at work, stoking the morning fire. He looked up as Isolde approached, recognition dawning on his soot-streaked face. "You're the lady from the square," he said bluntly, "the one Sir Edmund didn't remember." Isolde flinched but held her ground. "I need to know what happened to him. Please." Walter glanced around nervously before gesturing her closer. "It was brutal, miss. The northern savages ambushed our camp. Sir Edmund took an axe blow meant for Lord Harvington's son. When he finally woke, he remembered being a knight, remembered his duty, but parts of him were just gone." "What parts?" Isolde pressed. "Personal things, miss. He didn't recognize some of the men he'd trained with for years, couldn't recall his mother's face, though he knew she had died when he was young." Walter lowered his voice. "And he had nightmares, terrible ones, would wake screaming a name." Isolde's heart leapt. "What name?" The boy frowned. "I never heard it clear, but the healers, they gave him draughts to calm his mind, to help him forget the trauma, they said, to help him forget." The words chilled Isolde to her core. Across the village, in the eastern wing of Lord Harvington's manor, Edmund Thorne stood at his chamber window, watching the sun rise over Redcroft's thatched rooftops. Sleep had eluded him, his mind troubled by fractured dreams that dissolved like smoke whenever he tried to grasp them. Behind him, on the richly appointed bed, lay the parchments detailing his upcoming marriage to Lady Bryony, a union that would secure peace between their regions and bring honor to his name. He should have felt pride, satisfaction in a duty well fulfilled. Instead, an inexplicable emptiness gnawed at him. And then there was the woman in the square. Her tear-filled eyes had stirred something within him, a feeling both foreign and achingly familiar. The blue ribbon she'd clutched. Why had the sight of it sent such a sharp pain through his temple? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Lady Bryony entered, already dressed in a gown of deep burgundy, her golden hair arranged in elaborate braids around her head like a crown. "You appear troubled, my lord," she observed, moving to stand beside him at the window. "Was your rest disturbed?" Edmund offered her a courteous smile. "Merely adjusting to sleeping on land once more, my lady. The North has a way of making one forget the comforts of home." "The North has a way of making one forget many things," she replied, something strange flickering in her blue eyes. "But we must look forward now, not backward. Father has arranged for us to depart for Elwell the day after tomorrow. He feels a change of scenery would benefit your recovery." Edmund frowned. "So soon?" "I had hoped to reacquaint myself with Redcroft before departing." "There is nothing here worth lingering for," Bryony said firmly. "Besides, the wedding preparations await us in Elwell. The king expects the ceremony before winter sets in." As she spoke, Edmund's gaze drifted across the village rooftops to a modest structure near the village well, the Pine Hollow Inn. Something about the sight of it caused his head to throb painfully, and with the pain came a flash of something. A garden, blue flowers, a woman's laughter. "Perhaps you're right," he conceded, turning away from the window. "There is nothing for me here." Yet even as he spoke the words, a voice deep within his mind whispered, "Liar." That night, Edmund's dreams were chaotic and vivid. He saw himself standing by an old stone well, holding a woman close against his chest. Her face remained in shadow, but he could smell the lavender in her hair, feel the warmth of her body against his. "Remember," she whispered against his ear. "Remember me when the darkness comes." He woke with a strangled cry, sweat drenching his nightclothes. The dream had felt more real than the waking world around him, more real than the luxurious chamber, more real than the betrothal documents on his writing desk, more real than Lady Bryony's cool smiles. For the first time since returning to Redcroft, Edmund allowed himself to acknowledge a terrible possibility. What if the woman in the square had spoken the truth? What if there were parts of his life that had been taken from him, not by injury, but by design? Dawn broke over Redcroft with a gentle mist that clung to the thatched rooftops and swirled around the village square like spectral dancers. Isolde stood in the doorway of the Pine Hollow Inn, watching as the first rays of sunlight pierced the haze. She had made her decision during the long, sleepless night. She would not confront Edmund again, would not subject herself to the agony of those unrecognizing eyes, but neither would she hide away like a wounded animal. If there was even the slightest chance that somewhere deep within him lived the memory of their love, she would find a way to reach it. With trembling hands, she fastened her cloak and stepped into the cool morning air. The dew-dampened hem of her simple dress brushed against the cobblestones as she made her way toward the old stone well where it all began. There, amidst the sea of forget-me-nots she had planted over 3 long years, she would continue her vigil, not with desperate pleas or tears, but with quiet presence, a living reminder of what had been lost. The garden behind the inn had become something of a local wonder over the years. Village children often came to marvel at the expanding circle of blue flowers, each representing a day of Isolde's unwavering faith. As she settled on the edge of the well, she reached out to touch the delicate petals of the newest bloom, planted just yesterday, before her world had shattered. "So much beauty born of waiting," she whispered to the flowers. "Was it all for nothing?" The morning hours slipped by as Isolde sat in silent contemplation, occasionally gathering flowers to weave into simple garlands. She had learned from her mother, a healer known throughout the region before illness claimed her, that keeping one's hands busy could sometimes quiet a troubled mind. Today, however, each blue blossom only reminded her of Edmund's vacant stare. It was nearly midday when she heard approaching footsteps on the garden path. Looking up, Isolde's heart seized in her chest. Edmund stood at the garden's edge, dressed not in the ceremonial armor of yesterday, but in a simple tunic and breeches. Without the formal trappings of knighthood, he looked more like the man she remembered. The man who had held her through countless nights beneath the stars. For a long moment neither spoke. Edmund's gaze swept over the sea of blue flowers, a slight furrow appearing between his brows. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. The innkeeper said, "I might find you here," he said. I wished to ensure you were well after yesterday's distress." Isolde's fingers tightened around the half-finished garland in her lap. How like Edmund to concern himself with a stranger's welfare, even a stranger who had caused him public embarrassment. Always the gallant knight, even with his memory in tatters. "I am well enough, Sir Edmund," she replied softly, proud of how steady her voice remained despite the tempest in her heart. "Though I thank you for your concern." He took a step closer, and then another, his eyes drawn to the flowers at his feet. "These are forget-me-nots," he observed, bending to touch one with surprising gentleness. "I've never seen so many in one place. They grow well here," Isolde said simply, unwilling to explain their true significance. "The soil by the well favors them." Edmund straightened, wincing slightly as though the movement pained him. Isolde noticed then the way he favored his left side, evidence of the wounds Walter had described. Without thinking, she rose to her feet. "Your injury troubles you, my knight," she said, the familiar endearment slipping out before she could catch herself. Edmund's head snapped up, his eyes widening. For an instant, just the briefest flicker of time, something sparked in their depths. Recognition, confusion, pain. Then it was gone, replaced by that now familiar polite bewilderment. "Forgive me," he said, his voice strained. "When you called me that, I felt it was as though..." He trailed off, pressing the heel of his hand against his temple as though trying to contain a sudden headache. Isolde wanted desperately to go to him, to place her hands on either side of his face as she had done countless times before. Instead, she remained rooted by the well, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment. "What did you feel?" she asked softly. Edmund shook his head slowly. "I'm not certain. Like remembering a dream upon waking, only to have it dissolve when you try to grasp it." He looked up at her, confusion evident in his expression. "Who are you, truly? What were we to each other?" The question, so direct, so earnest, threatened to undo Isolde's careful composure. Here was her chance to tell him everything, to pour out 3 years of longing and loss. But looking into his troubled eyes, she realized that forcing her memories upon him would only push him further away. "Perhaps that's a question best answered in time," she said instead, gathering her courage, to offer him a small smile. "For now I am simply Isolde of the Pine Hollow Inn." A hint of frustration crossed Edmund's features. "Lady Bryony says we depart for Elwell tomorrow. There may not be time." Isolde felt her heart contract painfully, but she kept her expression serene. "Then we must make the most of today, mustn't we?" She held out the garland of forget-me-nots. "Would you walk with me a while, Sir Edmund? The village has changed little in your absence, but I find autumn makes everything appear new again." To her surprise, he accepted both the invitation and the flower garland. As they walked together through the garden and into the village beyond, Isolde was acutely aware of the distance between them, not just the physical space she carefully maintained, but the vast chasm of lost memories. Yet there was something undeniably familiar in their pace, in the way Edmund unconsciously matched his longer strides to her shorter ones, just as he always had. They spoke little at first, but as they passed familiar landmarks, Isolde offered brief, casual observations. The baker's youngest daughter was married last spring, or the old oak by the smithy fell during the winter storms. Nothing that would pressure Edmund's fragmented memory, but seeds nonetheless, planted in the hope that something might take root. As they approached the village outskirts, a light mist began to rise from the meadows beyond. Edmund paused beneath an ancient apple tree, its branches heavy with late-season fruit. Isolde watched as his gaze traveled up the gnarled trunk, a curious expression crossing his face. "This tree," he said slowly, "has it always had that split in the trunk?" Isolde's breath caught. The split had occurred during a violent summer storm 3 years ago, the very night before Edmund had departed for the northern campaign. They had sought shelter beneath its branches, laughing as rain soaked their clothing and thunder rolled overhead. "Yes," she said carefully, "a lightning strike. 3 summers passed." Edmund reached out to touch the weathered bark, his fingers tracing the scar that ran down the trunk. "I dreamt of this tree," he said so quietly that Isolde nearly missed the words. "Last night, I dreamt of standing here in the rain, feeling happy, truly happy." He turned to her, confusion and something like hope warring in his expression. "Were you there?" The question hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. Isolde's heart pounded so violently she was certain Edmund must hear it. This was the moment, the first real crack in whatever wall had been built around his memories. "Yes," she whispered. "I was there." Edmund closed his eyes, his breathing shallow as though he were concentrating intently on something just beyond his grasp. When he opened them again, the naked vulnerability in his gaze nearly brought Isolde to her. "Knees! I don't understand what's happening to me," he admitted. "Since returning to Redcroft, I've been plagued by dreams and sensations that make no sense. Places I shouldn't recognize feel familiar. And you," he shook his head helplessly. "When I look at you, I feel—" "What do you feel?" Isolde asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. Before he could answer, a shout rang out from the village. They turned to see a rider approaching at a gallop, the scarlet of Lady Bryony's cloak visible even through the thickening mist. "Edmund!" the noblewoman called, her voice sharp with alarm or anger. Isolde couldn't tell which. "We've been searching everywhere for you." The moment shattered. Isolde watched as Edmund's expression closed, the vulnerability replaced by the correct, dutiful mask he had worn upon his return. Whatever awakening had begun beneath the apple tree was already receding, like the tide pulling away from shore. "I was merely taking some air, my lady," he called back, already moving toward his betrothed. At the edge of the path, he paused and looked back at Isolde, still standing in the shadow of the ancient tree. "I would speak with you again," he said, quietly. "Before we depart," as Edmund helped Lady Bryony dismount, the noblewoman cast a cold, assessing glance toward Isolde. There was calculation in those blue eyes, and something more. Fear, perhaps. What did the daughter of an ambassador have to fear from a simple innkeeper's assistant? Unless, Isolde thought with a sudden chill, she knows exactly who I am to Edmund. Unless she has always known. The market square of Redcroft bustled with mid-afternoon activity, merchants hawking their wares, while village women haggled over the price of fresh autumn vegetables. Isolde moved through the crowd with purpose, her mind still reeling from the encounter beneath the apple tree. Edmund had remembered something, not her precisely, but a moment they had shared. It was a tiny flame of hope in the darkness that had enveloped her since his return. As she passed the village scribe's stall, a commotion caught her attention. Old Morris, the official letter writer for those in Redcroft who lacked the skill themselves, was engaged in a heated dispute with a red-faced guardsman. "I've done nothing wrong," Morris protested, his arthritic hands clutching protectively at the wooden box containing his inkpots and quills. "A man's allowed a drink after a day's honest work." The guardsman, whom Isolde recognized as one of Lord Harvington's men, sneered down at the elderly scribe. "Honest? Is that what you call falling? Asleep in the tavern and spilling ale all over official correspondence?" He snatched a soggy parchment from Morris's table. "Lord Elwell's man will have your fingers for this, old fool." Isolde hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. "Surely an accident isn't worth such harsh treatment," she said, placing herself between Morris and the guardsman. Master Morris has served this village faithfully for 30 years. The guardsman looked her up and down with undisguised contempt. Mind your place, woman. This isn't your concern. But it is mine, came a firm voice from behind them. The crowd parted to reveal Edmund, still dressed in his simple tunic rather than his knightly regalia. Despite this, his commanding presence was unmistakable. What seems to be the trouble here? The guardsman straightened immediately, offering a hasty bow. Sir Edmund, I was just explaining to this drunken scribe the consequences of damaging diplomatic correspondence. Edmund's gaze shifted from the guardsman to Morris, who seemed to shrink further into his threadbare cloak. Is this true, Master Scribe? Have you damaged official documents? Before Morris could respond, Isolde intervened again. It was an accident, my lord. Surely a fresh copy could be made without further unpleasantness? Edmund studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then he nodded decisively. Indeed, Master Morris, you will rewrite the document immediately, and you, he turned to the guardsman, will return to your post. I'll see that Lord Elwell's man receives the correspondence without delay. The guardsman looked as though he might protest, but thought better of it under Edmund's steady gaze. With a reluctant bow, he stalked away, disappearing into the crowd. Morris sagged with relief. Thank you, Sir Edmund. And you, Mistress Isolde. The old man's rheumy eyes darted between them. Always did have a kind heart, you two. Edmund's brow furrowed at the casual familiarity in the scribe's tone. You know us both. Morris seemed to realize his error, glancing nervously at Isolde. Aye, well, everyone knows the heroic Sir Edmund, and Mistress Isolde's been at the Pine Hollow these 3 years past. Small village, my lord. Everyone knows everyone. Isolde caught the hint of suspicion in Edmund's expression, but was spared his questions when Morris began gathering his writing materials with shaking hands. Best get to this correspondence right away. My thanks again, truly. As the old scribe shuffled away, Edmund turned to Isolde. You seem to have a talent for appearing wherever there's trouble, Mistress Isolde. Or perhaps trouble has a talent for finding me, she replied with a faint smile. Though I'm grateful for your intervention. Master Morris is well-meaning, if occasionally overindulgent in ale. Edmund nodded, his gaze drifting over the marketplace as though searching for something. Lady Bryony is meeting with the village seamstress to finalize her traveling clothes. I find I have little interest in fabric and lace. The casual reference to his impending departure with his betrothed stung Isolde more than she wished to admit. Then you're free to enjoy the market a while. I am. He hesitated, then added, would you walk with me again? I find your company soothing somehow. Soothing. Once he had called her presence essential as breathing. But Isolde pushed the painful thought aside and nodded her acceptance. As they strolled among the market stalls, she was acutely aware of the curious glances cast their way, the returning hero and the woman he had forgotten. They had nearly completed a circuit of the square when Isolde noticed Morris frantically gesturing to her from his stall. Excusing herself, she approached the old scribe, who immediately pressed a folded parchment into her hands. When you defended me earlier, I remembered something, he whispered urgently. Last winter, I helped a wounded soldier write letters. He was feverish, raving about blue flowers and promises kept, said they were for Isolde of the Pine Hollow Inn. Morris glanced nervously at Edmund, who was examining a blacksmith's wares several stalls away. The letters were never sent. The ambassador's man collected them, said they'd be delivered with the official dispatches, but something in his manner, Isolde's heart began to race. You're certain they were from Edmund, Sir Edmund Thorne? Morris nodded vigorously. Never saw his face proper, bandaged it was, but he had a knight's signet ring, and he spoke of you with such... The old man's eyes misted. Well, it wasn't the words of a stranger. I'll tell you that." With trembling fingers, Isolde unfolded the parchment Morris had given her. It was a draft, incomplete and crossed with corrections, but unmistakably written in the old scribe's hand. "My dearest Isolde, if you are reading this, know that I live, though at times I wish otherwise when the pain grows unbearable. The physicians say I may lose the arm, but I told them I would rather lose both arms than fail to return to you as promised. The northern campaign goes poorly. We are surrounded, cut off from reinforcements. But I think only of the garden we will plant together when I return, of the life we will build. Keep the blue ribbon close, my love. When next you see me, I shall reclaim it with 1,000 kisses, one for each day I've been away from your suite." The letter ended abruptly. Isolde pressed it to her chest, eyes burning with unshed tears. "He remembered me," she whispered. "Even wounded, he remembered." Morris nodded solemnly, wrote 7 letters over the course of a fortnight, each more desperate than the last as his fever worsened. Then one day, the ambassador's man, Lord Elwell's steward, came and said Sir Edmund had been moved to the royal physician's care. I never saw him again, Lord Elwell, Lady Bryony's father. The pieces began to fall into place with sickening clarity. These letters were deliberately intercepted, Isolde realized aloud. Edmund never forgot me, he was made to forget. Before Morris could respond, a commotion erupted across the square. Edmund had fallen to his knees beside the village well, his face contorted in pain as he clutched his head. Without thinking, Isolde rushed to his side, the letter still clutched in her hand. "Edmund," she cried, forgetting all pretense of formality. "What's wrong?" His eyes, when they met hers, were wild with confusion and pain. "The well," he gasped. "There's something about this well. I see names carved in stone." Isolde's breath caught. On the inner rim of the village well, hidden from casual view, Edmund had carved their names the night before he left for war. A secret promise, visible only to those who knew where to look. "Yes," she whispered, hope blooming painfully in her chest. "Our names, Edmund. Yours and mine." He stared at her, recognition and confusion warring in his gaze. "I carved them. The night before I left, you wore a blue ribbon in your hair and you asked me to keep it safe until you returned," Isolde finished, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. For a moment, one perfect, breathtaking moment, the Edmund she remembered looked back at her through those hazel eyes. His hand reached, for hers, fingers nearly touching. Then a shadow fell across them both. Lady Bryony stood there, her scarlet dress vivid as a wound against the grey stone of the square. Behind her loomed a thin, severe-looking man with the same golden hair and cold blue eyes. Her father, the ambassador of Elwell. "What is happening here?" Lady Bryony demanded, her voice brittle with barely controlled fury. Edmund blinked, the clarity in his eyes clouding once more as he looked up at his betrothed. I felt ill suddenly. This woman was kind enough to assist me. "Indeed, Lord." Elwell stepped forward, his gaze falling to the parchment still clutched in Isolde's hand. Something like alarm flashed across his aristocratic features. "What is that you're holding, woman?" Before Isolde could respond or conceal the letter, Lady Bryony snatched it from her grasp. As her eyes scanned the words, her perfect features contorted with rage. "What trickery is this?" she hissed, thrusting the parchment toward her father. "Some forgery to confuse my betrothed?" Lord Elwell barely glanced at the letter before tearing it to pieces. "Pathetic," he sneered. "The desperate ploy of a common woman trying to elevate herself by claiming the affections of a knight." Edmund rose unsteadily to his feet, confusion evident in his expression. "My lord, I don't understand." "There is nothing to understand." Lord Elwell cut him off sharply. "This woman has been harassing you since your return, has she not, claiming some prior attachment?" "I make no claims," Isolde said, her voice quiet but firm as she met the ambassador's cold stare. "The truth needs no embellishment, my lord. It simply is." Lord Elwell's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Be careful, woman. You tread on dangerous ground." "Come, Edmund," Lady Bryony interjected, taking his arm possessively. "Father's physician warned that your memories might be confused for a time. This woman is taking advantage of your condition." Edmund looked from Bryony to Isolde, doubt clouding his features once more. "The well," he said haltingly. "I remembered something about the well. A common well in a common village," Lord Elwell dismissed. "Nothing of importance." Isolde saw it then. The subtle way Edmund's eyes glazed slightly at the ambassador's words, as though a veil had been drawn across his consciousness. Whatever momentary clarity he had found was being deliberately obscured. "We depart for Elwell." "At first light," Lord Elwell announced, his tone brooking no argument. "This village holds nothing but distractions from your recovery, Sir Edmund." As they led Edmund away, he glanced back once at Isolde, confusion and something like desperation in his gaze. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty Edmund was not simply forgetting, he was being made to forget, and Lord Elwell was ensuring it remained so. The great hall of Lord Harvington's manor blazed with torchlight as nobles and dignitaries gathered for the official announcement of Sir Edmund Thorne's betrothal to Lady Bryony of Elwell. Minstrels played cheerful tunes in the gallery above, while servants scurried between guests with trays of wine and delicacies. It was, by all appearances, a joyous occasion, the formal beginning of a union that would strengthen alliances and bring peace to the northern borders. Yet Edmund stood apart from the festivities, rigid in his ceremonial armor, his gaze repeatedly drifting toward the great oak doors, as though expecting or perhaps hoping for an interruption. Since the incident at the well the previous day, a profound unease had settled into his bones, a sense that something fundamental was slipping through his fingers like sand. "You seem distracted, Sir Edmund," observed Lord Elwell, materializing beside him with 2 goblets of wine. He offered one to Edmund, who accepted it with mechanical courtesy. "Pre-wedding nerves, perhaps. I assure you my daughter will make an exemplary wife." Edmund forced a smile. "Lady Bryony is beyond reproach, my lord. I merely find myself unsettled since my return. The transition from battlefield to banquet hall is not always smooth." Lord Elwell's pale eyes studied him with unsettling intensity. "Indeed, the royal physician warned there might be adjustments, which is why I've brought a tincture to ease your discomfort." From within his opulent robes, he produced a small crystal vial of amber liquid. "A few drops in your wine before the announcement." For clarity, Edmund eyed the vial with growing suspicion. Since his meeting with Isolde at the well, fragments of memory had been surfacing with increasing frequency. Disjointed images of blue flowers, whispered promises, and a carved stone, bearing 2 intertwined names. None of it aligned with the narrative that had been presented to him since awakening from his injuries, that he was a decorated knight who had agreed to marry Lady Bryony as part of a peace treaty, with no prior attachments or commitments. Yet, each time these memories emerged, Lord Elwell or his physicians appeared with soothing words and medicinal drafts that left Edmund's mind foggy and compliant. "Perhaps I need no tincture tonight," Edmund suggested carefully, watching the ambassador's reaction. "I find myself thinking more clearly of late." A flicker of alarm crossed Lord Elwell's aristocratic features before his expression smoothed once more into benign concern. "As you wish, though I caution you against overtaxing yourself. The mind, like any wounded part of the body, requires gentle handling during recovery." Before Edmund could respond, Lord Harvington stepped onto the dais at the far end of the hall, raising his hands for silence. My honored guests, tonight we celebrate not only the triumphant return of our brave warriors from the Northern Campaign, but also the joyous betrothal of Sir Edmund Thorne to Lady Bryony of Elwell. Applause rippled through the hall as Lady Bryony, resplendent in a gown of deep crimson and gold, moved to stand beside her father. Her smile, practiced and perfect, revealed nothing of the tension Edmund had witnessed in her since their encounter with Isolde. "Sir Edmund," Lord Harvington called, "join your bride-to-be for the formal announcement." All eyes turned expectantly toward Edmund. He took a single step forward, then froze as the great doors swung open with a thunderous crash. A gust of autumn. Wind swept through the hall, carrying with it the scent of rain and wild herbs. In the doorway stood Isolde, her simple dress replaced by a gown of midnight blue that had clearly seen better days, but somehow enhanced the quiet dignity of her bearing. Around her neck hung a faded blue ribbon, visible to all. "Forgive my intrusion. My lords and ladies," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the guards who moved to intercept her. "But I cannot remain silent while a grave injustice unfolds before us." Lord Elwell stepped forward, fury etched into every line of his face. "Remove this woman at once. She is deranged, fixated on Sir Edmund since his return." But Edmund raised his hand, halting the guards. "Let her speak." A murmur of surprise rippled through the assembled guests. Lady Bryony's perfect composure slipped, revealing a flash of genuine fear as she exchanged glances with her father. Isolde moved forward until she stood at the center of the hall, all eyes upon her. 3 years ago, before departing for the Northern Campaign, Sir Edmund Thorne pledged himself to me beneath the old stone well of Redcroft. He carved our names together and gave me this ribbon, vowing to reclaim it upon his return. She reached into the folds of her dress and withdrew a folded parchment. "This is a copy of one of 7 letters Sir Edmund wrote to me during his recovery, letters that were intercepted by Lord Elwell's steward and never delivered." Lord Elwell's face contorted with rage. Preposterous, forged nonsense from a common woman seeking to elevate her station. "If they are forgeries," Isolde countered calmly, "then Sir Edmund himself will confirm it." She turned to face Edmund directly, her green eyes luminous with unshed tears. "You wrote that you would rather lose both arms than fail to return to me as promised, that we would plant a garden together, that you would reclaim this ribbon with 1,000 kisses, one for each day you were away." Edmund stared at her, transfixed, as something inside him shifted like ice breaking on a frozen river. Images flooded his mind, not fragments now, but complete memories. Isolde laughing as they sheltered from rain beneath the apple tree. Isolde teaching him the names of healing herbs in the garden behind the inn. Isolde in his arms by the well, tears on her cheeks as he promised to return. "The forget-me-nots," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "One for each day I was gone." Isolde nodded, a single tear spilling down her cheek. 1,095 blue flowers. I never stopped believing you would remember." The hall had fallen completely silent, every eye watching the drama unfold. Lady Bryony stepped forward, her composure cracking further. "Edmund, don't listen to her lies. Father, tell him." But Edmund was already moving, crossing the space between himself and Isolde as though drawn by an invisible thread. When he reached her, he slowly removed his ceremonial gauntlets and took her hands in his, hands that had once been as familiar to him as his own. "I carved our names on the inner rim of the well," he said, each word bringing with it a rush of returning memory. "Edmund and Isolde together for eternity, and when I was wounded, I dreamed of you. Even when I couldn't remember your face, I dreamed of you." Lord Elwell surged forward, his face purple with fury. "This is madness. The treaty, the alliance, you gave your word." Edmund turned to face the ambassador, his expression hardening. A word extracted while I was wounded and confused, with no memory of prior commitments. That is no true oath, my lord, and you know it." The hall erupted into chaos. Nobles whispering furiously, Lady Bryony sobbing into her hands, Lord Harvington attempting to restore order. But Edmund paid them no heed. With a decisive movement, he reached for the blue ribbon around Isolde's neck. "May I?" he asked softly. Isolde nodded, her eyes never leaving his face as he gently untied the ribbon and held it reverently between his fingers. "I remember everything now," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Every moment, every promise." "Edmund!" Lady Bryony's anguished cry cut through the commotion. "You cannot do this. We are to be wed. The king himself has blessed our union." Edmund turned to face his betrothed, genuine regret in his expression. "Lady Bryony, I cannot in good conscience marry you when my heart has already been given to another. Whatever agreement was made while I was not in my right mind must be undone." Lord Elwell pushed forward, placing himself between Edmund and his daughter. "This is treason," he hissed. "The king will hear of your betrayal. The king will hear." "The truth," Edmund replied firmly, "that I was manipulated while wounded, my memories suppressed with potions and lies." He turned back to Isolde, taking her hand decisively in his. "We leave for the king's court immediately. I will not spend another night beneath the roof of those who sought to erase you from my heart." Without waiting for a response from the stunned assembly, Edmund led Isolde toward the doors. Guards moved to block their path, looking uncertainly toward Lord Harvington for instruction. "Let them pass," the old lord said finally, surprising everyone, including himself. "This matter has grown beyond our authority to resolve. Let the king decide." As they stepped out into the cool night air, Edmund paused to look down at Isolde, wonder and grief mingling in his expression. 3 years, he whispered. 3 years stolen from us." Isolde reached up to touch his face, tracing the new lines etched by war and hardship. "Not stolen," she corrected gently. "Merely delayed. You found your way back to me, just as you promised." Under the silver light of the autumn moon, Edmund gently tied the blue ribbon around Isolde's wrist, then pressed his lips to the inside of her palm in the first of 1,000 promised kisses. "And I swear, by all that is sacred, I will never forget you again." The journey to Northwick Monastery was arduous, made more challenging by the early winter storms that had descended upon the countryside with unexpected ferocity. Edmund and Isolde travelled mostly at night, avoiding the main roads where Lord Elwell's men might search for them. By day, they sought shelter in abandoned shepherds' huts or dense copses of trees, always alert for the sound of approaching horses. Despite the hardship, a profound peace had settled between them, the quiet contentment of two souls reunited after a long separation. Each evening as they made camp, Edmund would remember another detail of their shared past, the exact shade of green in Isolde's eyes when she laughed, the way she always braided her hair over her right shoulder before sleep, how she could name every star in the night sky. "It's as though a fog is lifting," he told her on the third night of their journey as they huddled beneath a makeshift shelter of pine branches. "Each hour brings more clarity." Isolde watched him across the small fire, her heart full. The Edmund she had known was returning piece by piece, his voice regaining its warmth, his eyes their depth of feeling. Yet new shadows lingered there too, testament to the wounds, both physical and spiritual, that the northern campaign had inflicted. "Tell me what happened," she said softly. "In the north, if you can bear to speak of it." Edmund was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, weighted with memories he had only recently reclaimed. "We were ambushed at North Crag Pass. The intelligence was wrong. The enemy force was 3 times what we'd been told to expect." His hand unconsciously Moved to the scar at his temple. I saw Lord Harvington's son fall. I went to his aid, and then nothing, just darkness. He looked up at her, pain etched in the lines of his face. I woke in a field hospital 2 weeks later. My wounds were healing, but my mind... He shook his head. It was as though parts of me had been carved away. I knew I was a knight. I remembered my training, my duty. But when I tried to recall anything personal, my childhood, my parents, you, there was only emptiness. Isolde moved to sit beside him, taking his scarred hands in hers. And Lord Elwell was there? His personal physician attended me. I was given drafts for the pain multiple times daily. Each time I drank, the emptiness deepened. Edmund's fingers tightened around hers. I wrote letters in a fever. I remember that now. Letters to someone whose face I couldn't recall, but whose absence felt like a wound deeper than any blade he could inflict. 7 letters, Isolde murmured. Morris the scribe told me. When Lord Elwell presented his daughter as my betrothed, I had no reason to question it. There was nothing in my mind to contradict him. Edmund's voice broke. How could I forget you so completely? Isolde reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his beard. You didn't forget, my love. Not truly. They merely buried your memories beneath potions and lies. But the heart knows what the mind cannot recall. Edmund turned his face to press a kiss into her palm, his eyes closing at the contact. When I saw you in the square that first day, something inside me recognized you, even as my mind denied it. It was like looking at a beloved face through frosted glass, familiar yet unreachable. A sudden gust of wind sent sparks swirling upward from their small fire. In the distance, wolves howled, a mournful sound that echoed the years of separation. They had endured. We should reach Northwick by midday tomorrow, Edmund said, pulling their shared blanket more securely around Isolde's shoulders. The abbess there is known for her wisdom and healing skills. Perhaps she can help us understand what was done to me and how to ensure it cannot happen again. Isolde nodded, leaning against his solid warmth. And then to the King's Court, to challenge Lord Elwell's treaty? Yes, though not without risk. The king values the alliance with Elwell. Edmund's expression grew troubled. Lord Elwell will claim I acted dishonorably, that I willingly agreed to the betrothal and then abandoned my sworn duty without proof of his deception. We will find a way, Isolde assured him, though uncertainty gnawed at her. The word of a common woman against that of a powerful ambassador. It was a battle as uneven as the ambush at North Crag Pass. They set out before dawn. The next morning, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten as they crested a hill overlooking a vast stretch of moorland. The journey was harder now, the terrain growing steep and rocky as they approached the foothills where Northwick Monastery perched like an eagle's nest against the mountainside. By mid-morning, a driving sleet had begun to fall, stinging their faces and turning the narrow path treacherously slick. Edmund forged ahead, one hand steadying Isolde while the other gripped his sword. The weather had worsened so rapidly that both suspected unnatural forces. Perhaps Lord Elwell's court magician had tracked their escape. There! Edmund shouted over the howling wind, pointing toward a stone structure barely visible through the swirling white. The monastery's lower gate. They stumbled forward, nearly blind in the storm, when a sound carried on the wind, the distant baying of hounds. Edmund's face hardened. Elwell's men. They found our trail. Isolde's heart pounded with fear, but she pressed on, her frozen fingers clutching Edmund's cloak. They had come too far to be captured now, too close to sanctuary. The monastery gate loomed before them, massive and unyielding. Edmund pounded on the thick oak with the hilt of his sword, the sound swallowed by the storm's fury. "Open in the name of the king!" he shouted, his voice breaking with desperation. For long moments, there was no response. The baying of the hounds grew closer, joined now by the shouts of men. Edmund positioned himself between Isolde and the approaching sounds, drawing his sword despite his exhaustion. "If they take me," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes, "continue to the monastery. The abbess will grant you sanctuary." "I will not leave you," Isolde replied fiercely. "Not again. Whatever comes, we face it together. Just." As the first shapes emerged from the white curtain of sleet, armored men leading massive hounds, the monastery gate creaked open. A figure in a grey robe beckoned urgently. "Quickly! Inside!" They stumbled through the narrow opening, collapsing onto the stone floor of the monastery's outer courtyard as the gate swung shut behind them. The sounds of pursuit were instantly muffled, then silenced as heavy wooden bars fell into place, securing the entrance. "You are safe now," the robed figure said, kneeling beside them. It was a woman, middle-aged with keen eyes and a face lined by years of contemplation. "I am Sister Agnes. What brings a knight and his lady to our door in such desperate condition?" Edmund struggled to his feet, swaying with exhaustion. "We seek the abbess. I am Sir Edmund Thorne, and this is Lady Isolde. We come seeking understanding and justice." Sister Agnes's eyes widened at the names. "Sir Edmund, we received word of your death months ago, a letter from Lord Elwell himself, expressing condolences for your fall in battle." Isolde gasped, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "He reported you dead to ensure I would stop waiting, that no one would question when you returned with no memory of me." Edmund's expression darkened with fury, but before he could respond, his legs buckled beneath him. The long journey, combined with the still healing wounds from battle, had finally overcome even his formidable strength. "Edmund," Isolde cried, catching him as he collapsed. Sister Agnes called for help, and soon additional sisters appeared with a litter. As they carried Edmund's unconscious form toward the infirmary, Isolde followed, her heart pounding with renewed fear. She had lost him once to war and deception. She could not bear to lose him again. The monastery infirmary was warm and fragrant with herbs, a stark contrast to the icy desolation outside. Edmund was laid upon a narrow bed, his sodden cloak and armor removed to reveal the extent of his injuries. His left side was a map of partially healed wounds and angry scars, testament to the ferocity of the battle at North Crag Pass. The abbess herself came to attend him, Mother Hildegard, renowned throughout the kingdom for her knowledge of healing arts. Her weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency as she examined Edmund's injuries. "These wounds have been treated, but poorly," she observed, her voice calm despite the gravity of her assessment. "And there is something else, evidence of prolonged use of dream shade." Isolde looked up sharply. "Dream shade," Mother Hildegard nodded grimly. "A potent herb that dulls the mind and makes one susceptible to suggestion. Used sparingly, it can ease the torment of those with battle sickness. But administered repeatedly." Her eyes met Isolde's. "It can erase memories, reshape a man's understanding of his own past." "Lord Elwell," Isolde whispered, her suspicions confirmed. "His physician gave Edmund drafts daily during his recovery." "A grave misuse of healing knowledge," Mother Hildegard said, her voice hardening with anger. "One that violates both natural and divine law." She moved to a cabinet filled with vials and dried herbs, selecting several with careful deliberation. "We can counteract the effects, strengthen what has already begun to heal naturally, but it will not be pleasant for him." Isolde watched as the abbess mixed a pungent concoction, adding drops from various vials into a small clay cup. "Will it restore his memories completely?" "That depends on how deeply they were buried and on Sir Edmund's own will to recover them." Mother Hildegard approached the bed, lifting Edmund's head gently to administer the medicine. "Stay with him. Your presence will anchor him to the truth as the dream shade's influence is purged." The hours that followed were harrowing. Edmund thrashed in delirium, his body burning with fever as the abbess's remedy worked to cleanse the lingering effects of the dream shade from his system. Isolde never left his side, bathing his face with cool cloths, whispering reassurances when he cried out in confusion or pain. As dawn approached, Edmund's fever finally broke. He lay still, his breathing deep and even, his face peaceful for the first time since their reunion. Isolde, exhausted beyond measure, had just begun to doze in her chair beside the bed when his voice, clear and strong, startled her awake. "Isolde." She lifted her head to find him watching her, his hazel eyes clear and focused, and filled with a depth of emotion that stole her breath away. This was not the confused knight from the village square, nor even the man who had led her from Lord Harvington's hall with newfound but incomplete memories. This was her Edmund, whole and present. "You're here," he said wonderingly, reaching out to touch her face as though to confirm she wasn't a dream. "You found me." "Always," she whispered, leaning into his touch, "as you once found me." For in that moment, both remembered how they had first met. Isolde, newly orphaned and desperate. Edmund, a knight returning from his first campaign, discovering her being accosted by brigands near the village well. How he had defended her without hesitation, then secured her a position at the Pine Hollow Inn when he learned she had nowhere to go. "I remember everything now," Edmund said, his voice gaining strength. "Not just us, but what Elwell did. The treaty was a sham, a cover for his true purpose." Isolde frowned. "What do you mean?" "North Crag Pass, the ambush." Edmund's expression darkened. "It wasn't a failure of intelligence, it was betrayal. I saw Lord Elwell's steward meeting with the enemy commander the night before the attack. When I confronted him, he fled. I pursued, but was caught in the ambush the next day." "You were silenced," Isolde realized with horror. "They never expected you to survive your wounds, and when I did, they ensured I wouldn't remember what I had seen." Edmund struggled to sit up, grimacing with the effort. "We must reach the king. Lord Elwell isn't just manipulating a marriage alliance, he's committed treason against the crown." Mother Hildegard entered the infirmary, her knowing eyes taking in Edmund's improved condition. "You have strength of spirit, Sir Edmund, to have overcome such a powerful influence so quickly." Edmund inclined his head respectfully. "Thanks to your wisdom, Mother Abbess, and to Isolde's unwavering faith." The abbess approached, carrying a small wooden box. "The storm has passed, but Lord Elwell's men remain at our gates, demanding we surrender you both." Isolde's heart sank. They were trapped, with no way to reach the king. But Mother Hildegard smiled, a glint of mischief in her aging eyes. "Fortunately, the monastery has passages known only to a few, tunnels that lead beyond the moors to the western road. And I have prepared something to ensure your safe journey." She opened the box to reveal 2 simple silver amulets on leather cords. "These contain herbs that will mask your presence from Lord Elwell's hunting dogs and from darker means of tracking." Edmund accepted the amulets with gratitude. "We are in your debt, Mother Abbess." "No debt between those who serve truth," she replied. "Now rest while you can. Tonight, when the moon is hidden, you will depart for the king's court." As Mother Hildegard departed, Edmund turned to Isolde, taking her hands in his. "I have been a warrior all my life," he said softly, "but never have I witnessed courage to match yours these past days." Isolde shook her head. "I did only what my heart demanded, to find you, to remind you. And you succeeded where all of Elwell's schemes failed." Edmund drew her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held 3 years of longing, of promises kept despite impossible odds. When they finally parted, breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Whatever comes next, whatever we must face at the king's court, know this. Not magic nor treachery, nor the will of kings can separate us again." In the quiet sanctuary of the monastery infirmary, as winter sunlight filtered through narrow windows, 2 souls found healing deeper than any potion could provide. The healing that comes when love, tested by separation and betrayal, emerges, unbroken on the other side. The royal palace of King's Meadow rose majestically against the winter sky, its white stone towers adorned with fluttering banners of crimson and gold. After a grueling journey through hidden mountain paths and dense forests, Edmund and Isolde stood at last upon the crest of a hill, overlooking the seat of power that would determine their fate. "It's more imposing than I remembered," Edmund murmured, his hand unconsciously seeking Isolde's. The silver amulets from Mother Hildegard hung around their necks, warm against their skin despite the biting cold. Isolde squeezed his fingers reassuringly. "Truth is on our side. The king is said to be just. Just, yes, but also practical." Edmund's expression was grave. "The alliance with Elwell secures the northern border without the cost of maintaining additional garrisons. He may not welcome evidence that his trusted ambassador is a traitor." They had debated their approach throughout the journey. Edmund, as a knight of the realm, could request an audience with the king, but such a formal petition might give Lord Elwell time to intercept them. Instead, they had decided on a more direct approach, one that carried greater risk but offered the element of surprise. "The winter tournament begins today," Edmund said, surveying the colourful pavilions erected on the fields surrounding the palace. "Every noble house in the kingdom will be represented, including Elwell. We'll enter during the opening ceremonies, when all are gathered in the great hall." Isolde nodded, though apprehension tightened her chest. She had spent her life in the Shuha, quiet shadows of village existence. Now she would stand before the most powerful figures in the realm, challenging one of their own. "I'm ready," she said, with more confidence than she felt. They approached the palace gates disguised as pilgrims, their faces partially concealed by the hoods of their travel-worn cloaks. The silver amulets seemed to work their magic. The guards barely glanced at them as they joined the throng of visitors entering the palace grounds for the tournament festivities. Inside, the great hall of King's Meadow was a spectacle of medieval splendor. Massive oak beams arched overhead, from which hung hundreds of candles in iron chandeliers. Tapestries depicting the kingdom's storied history adorned the walls, while long trestle tables groaned beneath platters of food and flagons of wine. Knights in polished armor mingled with ladies in their finest gowns, while minstrels played lively tunes from the gallery above. At the far end of the hall, upon a raised dais, sat King Henry himself, a man in his 5th decade, whose reputation for wisdom was matched only by his fierce dedication to the kingdom's stability. Beside him sat his queen, regal in blue velvet and silver, and to his right the various ambassadors of allied regions. Lord Elwell was among them, resplendent in robes of scarlet and gold, his daughter Lady Bryony at his side. Even from a distance, Isolde could see the stiffness in the young woman's posture, the hollow quality of her smile as nobles approached to pay their respects. "She is as much a pawn in her father's game as I was," Edmund observed quietly. "I bear her no ill will." The herald's trumpet sounded, signaling the formal commencement of the tournament. As the assembled guests fell silent, King Henry rose to address the gathering. "Noble lords and ladies, honored guests, brave knights of the realm," his voice resonated through the hall. "We welcome you to the winter tournament, a celebration of valor, skill, and the peace our kingdom now enjoys after years of northern conflict." As the king spoke of unity and prosperity, Edmund and Isolde moved carefully through the crowd, drawing steadily closer to the dais. They had timed their approach to coincide with the king's traditional acknowledgement of knights who had distinguished themselves in recent campaigns. "We would especially honor those who secured our northern borders against the savage tribes," the king continued. "Lord Harvington, step forward with your valiant men." Lord Harvington, a greying man with the weathered face of a career soldier, approached the dais with several knights in formation behind him. As they knelt before the king, Henry nodded with approval. "Your service has brought lasting peace through the new alliance with Elwell," the king acknowledged. "Though we mourn those who fell in the final battle at Northcrag Pass." It was then that Edmund removed his cloak and stepped forward, his knight's bearing unmistakable despite his travel-worn appearance. "Your Majesty," he called, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent hall, "I fear you have been gravely misinformed about the events at Northcrag Pass." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Lord Elwell shot to his feet, his face contorting with shock and fury. "Guards, seize that man! He is an impostor!" But King Henry raised his hand, halting the guards who had begun to move toward. "Edmund, stay," he commanded, his shrewd eyes fixed on the knight who had emerged so dramatically from the crowd. "Sir Edmund Thorne, is it not? We were told you perished in the northern campaign." "As you can see, Your Majesty, those reports were false." Edmund approached the dais and knelt, showing proper deference despite the unorthodox nature of his appearance. "I come bearing evidence of treachery that threatens the very peace we have sacrificed so much to achieve." Lord Elwell pushed forward, his composure cracking. "This is outrageous. This man abandoned his post, broke a sacred betrothal contract, and now spreads lies to cover his dishonorable actions." "Silence, Lord Elwell," the king commanded, his expression inscrutable. "Sir Edmund is a knight of proven valor. We will hear what he has to say." He gestured for Edmund to rise. "Speak, Sir Knight, but choose your words with care. These are serious accusations." Edmund stood, his gaze steady. "The ambush at Northcrag Pass was no accident of war, Your Majesty. It was orchestrated by Lord Elwell's own steward, whom I witnessed meeting with the enemy commander the night before the attack." Another wave of shocked murmurs swept the hall. Lord Elwell's face had gone deathly pale. "When I was wounded and believed unlikely to survive," Edmund continued, "Lord Elwell's physician administered potions containing dream shade, not to heal, but to erase my memory of what I had witnessed and of prior commitments that would have prevented the alliance. Marriage to Lady Bryony." King Henry's expression darkened. "Dream shade is a controlled substance, its misuse punishable by exile. These are extraordinary claims, Sir Edmund. What proof do you offer?" It was then that Isolde stepped forward, removing her own cloak to reveal the simple blue gown beneath. She knelt beside Edmund, drawing strength from his presence. "Your Majesty, I am Isolde of Redcroft. Before Sir Edmund departed for the northern campaign, he pledged himself to me. For 3 years I awaited his return, only to discover upon his homecoming that his memories had been taken from him through Lord Elwell's treachery." Lord Elwell sneered. "The testimony of a common woman? This is absurd, Your Majesty. Sir Edmund agreed to the betrothal of his own free will in service to the kingdom's interests." "A pledge made when I had no memory of prior commitments is no." "True pledge," Edmund countered firmly. "But this is not merely about a broken betrothal, Your Majesty. It concerns the security of the realm itself. Lord Elwell betrayed our forces to the northern tribes, then manipulated the aftermath to secure his position through the proposed marriage alliance." The hall had fallen completely silent, every eye fixed on the dramatic confrontation unfolding. Before the throne, King Henry sat motionless, his expression unreadable as he absorbed the accusations. "These are grave charges, requiring substantial proof," he said finally. "What evidence can you present beyond your word?" It was then that a new voice spoke from the edge of the dais. "I can provide that evidence, Father." Lady Bryony stepped in forward, her face pale but determined as she moved to stand beside Edmund and Isolde. A collective gasp rose from the assembly at this unexpected development. "Bryony!" Lord Elwell hissed. "Return to your place immediately." She ignored him, meeting the king's surprised gaze directly. "Your Majesty, I discovered the truth when Sir Edmund began to recover his memories in Redcroft. My father has manipulated us all. The betrothal, the alliance, everything built upon deception." From within her gown, she withdrew a small leather pouch. "These are the dream shade potions my father's physician prepared. I took them when I realized what was happening." Lord Elwell lunged forward, his composure completely shattered. "You treacherous girl, after everything I've done for our family's advancement." "Guards!" the king commanded sharply. "Restrain Lord Elwell." As armored men moved to secure the ambassador, King Henry gestured for Bryony to approach. "You understand the gravity of turning against your own father, Lady Bryony." She nodded, her voice steady, despite the tears that glistened in her eyes. "I do, Your Majesty, but I cannot be party to treason, nor to a marriage built on such cruelty." She glanced at Isolde. "When I saw how this woman had waited, had kept faith through years of separation, I knew I could not stand between such devotion." The king received the pouch of potions, examining its contents briefly before handing it to his trusted advisor. "This will be verified by the royal physician." He turned his attention back to Edmund and Isolde, who remained kneeling before him. "Rise, both of you. If what you have claimed proves true, Lord Elwell will face the full consequence of his actions." As they stood, Edmund stepped forward once more. "Your Majesty, there is one more matter I must address. The treaty with the northern tribes. It was negotiated in bad faith. The terms Lord Elwell proposed were never intended to be honored." King Henry's expression grew troubled. "This puts us in a precarious position. Without the alliance through marriage and with the treaty compromised, we risk renewed hostilities on the northern border." "If I may, Your Majesty," Isolde spoke, her voice clear despite her nerves. "Sir Edmund is respected by the northern chieftains for his honor in battle. If he were to lead a new delegation with honest terms that benefit both sides, a lasting peace might still be achieved." The king studied her with newfound interest. "You speak with wisdom, Isolde of Redcroft. Perhaps there is merit in your suggestion." He turned to Edmund. "Would you undertake such a mission, Sir Edmund, after all you have endured?" Edmund bowed deeply. "I would, Your Majesty, for the good of the realm and to right the wrongs committed in its name." King Henry nodded, then rose to address the stunned assembly. "Lord Elwell will be held for further questioning. The tournament shall proceed as planned, but the proposed alliance marriage is hereby dissolved." He looked directly at Edmund and Isolde. "As for you two, your loyalty to each other and to the truth, even at great personal risk, exemplifies the highest virtues of our kingdom." As Lord Elwell was led away, his face contorted with impotent rage, Lady Bryony approached Edmund and Isolde. "I hope someday you can forgive me for my unwitting role in this deception," she said softly. Isolde took the young woman's hands in her own. "There is nothing to forgive. You showed great courage today." Bryony smiled sadly. "Not courage, simply the desire to be worthy of the kind of love you two share." She glanced toward the king, who was now in deep conversation with his advisors. "I believe His Majesty will be fair in his judgment of my father, and perhaps in time our houses can find a better way to secure peace than through forced marriages." As the hall gradually returned to the business of the tournament, nobles casting curious glances their way, Edmund drew Isolde close. "It seems our journey is not yet complete," he murmured. "The northern delegation will take time to arrange." Isolde looked up at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears of relief and joy. "After 3 years of waiting, I find I don't mind. A little more time, as long as we face it together." Edmund bent to kiss her, heedless of the watching court, sealing their reunion with a tenderness that spoke of all they had endured and overcome. "Together," he promised against her lips. "Always. Together." As the final chapter of Edmund and Isolde's journey comes to a close, we're left to ponder the extraordinary power of love that refuses to be forgotten. 3 years of separation, deliberate manipulation, and even potions designed to erase memories. Yet the heart remembered what the mind could not. Would you have maintained such unwavering faith through years of silence? Would you have recognized the one you loved, even when they looked at you as a stranger? Perhaps the most profound lesson from their medieval tale is that true love leaves an imprint that transcends conscious memory. Like Isolde's garden of forget-me-nots, one flower for each day of waiting, devotion creates something beautiful, even in the midst of loss. Edmund and Isolde's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't grand gestures or passionate declarations, but simply refusing to forget, refusing to give up when all evidence suggests we should. If this journey through medieval England touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video and sharing it with someone who understands what it means to love deeply. Subscribe to our channel for more captivating historical romances that will transport you to worlds where honor, devotion, and courage still reign supreme. Thank you for experiencing this tale of remembrance and redemption, where love, once thought lost, found its way home against all odds.